That's rather lengthy, and I'll give it to you, and of course, you do what you want with it. It's too lengthy for anybody to broadcast in its entirety. I'm going to start off by saying I am innocent, affirming my innocence. I've been found guilty. I know that. Most people think I'm guilty, but the fact remains I'm as innocent now as I was before I was arrested. Nothing that the law has done has made me more or less guilty, in fact. My innocence in this case is more disturbing than most because I'm completely innocent. If I'm not guilty, I'm not at all guilty. I was a nurturing father, a gentle husband, an above-average provider, a helpful church-going religious man, a productive member of society. In short, I was a good person, not a criminal type. Many who are tried and found not guilty, or who are found guilty but whose guilt people question, at least were involved in some way in the crime. They were there, they helped, they were part of it. This is not the case with me. I'm either guilty, in which case you have to say that a basically law-abiding, good citizen, kind, gentle, God-fearing man suddenly hatched and carried out a plan to cold-bloodedly murder his entire family whom he loved. Or I'm not guilty, in which case you have to come to the conclusion that I had nothing whatsoever to do with this horrible crime, that I was not only its first and major victim, but that I was then mercilessly victimized by the law that was designed to help and protect in situations like this. I'd like to go into the reasons I think the state's case was insufficient, the reasons that I was not proven guilty. I know that I was found guilty by a jury. I think the jury honestly tried to do a good job, but they were wrong. I was not proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, the standard they were to apply. Let me show you what I mean. Go through the evidence. Stomach contents first. That's the only single piece of convicting evidence in the trial, time of death based on stomach contents. Of those who were qualified to give their opinions as to time of death at the trial, one of the two that testified for the state said the children died 2 hours or less after eating, putting them to death before 9 o'clock p.m. The other said they died between 8:30 and 11:30 p.m. Of the four that testified for the defense, one said they died between 9 p.m. and 2 in the morning. The second said it was equally possible that they died before as well as after midnight, and less likely but possible that they died after 2 in the morning. The third said the stomach contents were not useful in this case. And the fourth said stomach contents cannot ever establish time of death. To convict me, you have to prove that they died before I left the house, that I was the only one there, etc. Since I left the house before 11:30, the only one witness of the six who is a convicting witness is the one that says he's sure that they died by 9 o'clock. It's a theory that is absurd, and I'll go into that in a minute. But it was on the basis of his testimony that the jury convicted me, in spite of the fact that it was markedly different from any of the other 5 experts. The appellate court says the jury has the right to decide who to believe. I say that it's very unfair to convict a man based upon the testimony of one, discounting that of 5 others, and saying that I've been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And remember, time of death opinion is the only single convicting factor in my trial. Another suspicious aspect about the stomach contents is that they appear to be altered. A St. Louis researcher tested the stomach contents for the prosecution, Grace's stomach contents, and found it had a similar mix of vegetables as the others. All 3 children's were the same, he said. There were mushrooms, among other things, in Grace's stomach. Now, I can guarantee you, and both grandmothers and other people will support this, that Grace never put mushrooms into her stomach. She would carefully pick them out of anything she ate that had them. She wouldn't eat mushroom soup. She wouldn't eat Chinese food, for instance, because it had mushrooms in it that she couldn't detect, that she couldn't find. She never, ever ate mushrooms. So what are they doing in her stomach contents? That bothers me. That bothers all of us who knew her. think the answer is that they were altered. I don't say it's malicious. It may be. I think it was careless. I think that they were mixed around, altered. I don't know what happened. Finally, and ironically, the very day I got the decision from the appellate court, which was a Thursday, upholding the conviction, I got a letter from a Canadian doctor wishing me good luck and mentioning that as to stomach contents, time of death opinions, quote, "You might be interested to know that your trial caused a considerable stir in forensic circles here in Canada because ever since the famous Truscott trial in 1959 and its review by the Supreme Court of Canada in 1966, such evidence has been totally discredited here." End of quote. Since their only element of proof was opinion evidence that was debatable at best, they needed a motive. There is none. Let's face it. If you want to believe I killed my own children in premeditated, well-planned, cold blood, you have to say, if you're honest, but we have no idea why he did it. Of course, they couldn't do that, but any motive theory they can make up is clearly foolish, so what they did is refuse to say their motive theory before the trial. And then at the trial, suggest not one, but three distinct motive theories, and I might add that they're partly contradictory. They can't all three be true. Let me state them here. First, that I went through a metamorphosis in my life, wanting new and exciting experiences, that my wife and children didn't fit into my plans, so I killed them. Now, men have gone through midlife crises. We've all heard the story about the 40-year-old fella who throws away his suits and buys blue jeans and trades in his Olds 98 and buys a Porsche 944 Turbo and runs away with a 19-year-old neighbor girl. And that's not a real life situation, but it's the story, it's the wild scenario that they set up. But even he doesn't go and murder his family. It's just not in the cards. In my case, where all the evidence clearly shows a strong, loving family relationship, it's not believable. Okay, the next theory. This theory admits that I loved my family. They can hardly deny it. It says that I was deeply religious. That's true. It hangs on to the metamorphosis, but this time saying that my new worldly direction was so against my conscience that I had to do something. Since I was hurtling headlong down the path to destruction and couldn't save myself, I at least determined out of love for my family to save them from following me into such a life for their good. I did this for good, moral, religious, philosophical reasons. I planned and executed a multiple murder for Christian reasons. That's preposterous. The third motive theory keeps the metamorphosis, this time saying that I wanted both my new and wild lifestyle and the approval of the Christian community I was in fellowship with. That to continue with expanded sexual contacts while married would have brought censure from the church. That's true. That the obvious way out of marriage, which is divorce, was not allowed by my church. There are three problems with this one. First, continuing with expanded sexual contacts, whether married or not, was equally censurable by that Christian community. It doesn't make any difference whether I'm married or not. You can't fornicate and you can't commit adultery. They're both wrong. Two, there's not a single bit of evidence that either Susie or I ever wanted, ever talked about, ever thought of a divorce. You've got Susie's diary available since clear back before we were married. Never does one comment come up in it, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. I never told anyone. You'll never find anyone that I said that I was even so much as dissatisfied with Susie, and I wasn't. Third point, anyone who knows our religious group will tell you that no one who's not thoroughly convinced that we are correct, that we're right, would want to be part of it. It's not, there's nothing there. It's lousy singing, dull, boring meetings, no child care, no singles meetings, no extracurricular fellowships, youth fellowships, married groups. The things that people find exciting and appealing about churches, they aren't there. You go there if you believe in it. Now, if I didn't believe in it, and if I wanted to live a lifestyle totally contrary to that, then I would have gone ahead and done just that. I wouldn't have tried to maintain good standing with the Christian community. And had I gone ahead and lived that kind of a life, I wouldn't have maintained good standing with the Christian community, as I mentioned earlier, whether married or not. People leave the fellowship all the time for those very reasons. It's not worldly enough for them. Okay, the appellate court got a fourth kind of combined motive theory from the record. They say this, quote, "The motive was very broad. The state proposed that a conflict develop between defendant's changed lifestyle and his religious tenets on marriage. Resolution of the conflict led defendant to kill his family." End quote. In other words, a, quote, "conflict existed between defendant's beliefs and his actions." End quote. So since I was practicing that which my beliefs excluded, I solved the conflict, they say, by killing my family. Again, it doesn't make sense. Unless the religion that precludes sexual forays with the models allows murder. Do I need to tell you that it doesn't? How was I going to solve a conscience problem by committing murder based on my fundamental, Bible-believing Christian religion? None of these motive theories add up, nor do some of the other things that are in the appellate court's decision. For instance, quote, "The church's reactions to illicit relationships would be relevant to his desire and need to keep the conduct secret." Okay, I agree. Now, what is my desire to keep the conduct secret relevant to? Certainly murdering my family would tend to bring it out, and their deaths did exactly that, not conceal it. That doesn't make any sense. They say next, quote, "Defendant's business success is a factor which enabled him to expand his contacts with young women, travel out of state, expand his contacts with persons ascribing to less stringent moral standards. Evidence of this business success would therefore tend to advance the motive theory." That's absolutely wrong. It would tend to blow the motive theory away. Since I had such freedom in my business to enjoy and expand new contacts, and that's true, I did. I had money, I had an airplane, I could go on business trips without telling anyone where I was going or why I was going there. I even had an instrument rating so I could fly through the clouds in my airplane and not have to worry about weather. I was very free. Why change a good thing? See, I had freedom to enjoy my family and to expand, as they say, my contacts with women of low moral fiber. If that's what I wanted, why interrupt that? Why kill my family? The freedom, it doesn't advance their theory. It explodes the motive theory, in my opinion. Finally, in any event, any of these motive theories, why kill my children? None of them add up to that. Some of them, if believable, and I say they're not, may give me a reason to kill my wife. Why my children? They say this was planned. They say I'm very intelligent. Then why couldn't I have planned out a way to murder Susie only? As you know, I certainly could have. The actual motive theory really was little use to the prosecution, except to bring in testimony that without it they couldn't have gotten into the trial. That testimony includes my dealings with models, admittedly not something I'm proud of, but what do they have to do with murder? The fact that I shaved off my mustache, which I did for Susie 3 months before, my weight loss, which was done at my doctor's advice a year before, a change of hairstyle. I parted my hair in a different place, which I did 16 months before because of a free coupon. And newer, fancier clothes. And this one is ridiculous. I never talked to anyone who knew me well throughout my life. I have never paid attention to my clothes. I've never been concerned about what I wore. I never even bought my own clothes. Susie went out. I noticed the other night going through her diary, there are entries, bought a shirt for David. She did the clothes shopping. I wasn't even concerned about what I wore. And then they wanted to bring in the fact that I made a lot of money. And I did make more money than the average worker. That's true. But what does it have to do with murder? There's no financial motive here. All this they brought in, they were allowed to bring in to prove this nebulous motive theory. And really, what it did was it prejudiced the jury. All right, another aspect of their proof, getting away from motive and stomach contents, the ransacking of my house. They say it was a faked burglary, that it was made to look like a real burglary. A state witness said that a professional burglar would not have done things like that. I ask this, do you really need to look at the angle of the wall hangings, the setting of the drawers, or the lay of the bedspread to figure out that a professional burglar didn't do this? Look at the murders. Do professional burglars butcher people? There are in my mind, three possibilities about this burglary. One, somebody, not a professional burglar, obviously, was looking for something specific. What? I don't know. Why? I don't know. Possibility number two, someone faked a burglary. I think that's a possibility. Now, who would do that? Anyone with a motive. Now, they said a fake burglary shows that I did it. I agree that I'm one of the people it would point toward. It would also point toward anyone who had a motive to kill my family. In other words, any slaying that was not random and senseless, a fake burglary would provide an alternate motive. And third, a random and senseless crime that there was no motive at all, in which case you can't rationalize why they did what they did. We just don't know. Okay, alibi. They tried to prove that my business trip was a prearranged alibi. They maintained that I lied about the samples I had with me, that I saw customers that I didn't need to see, that basically there was no business need for the trip. Now, I ask you, who knows better what my business needed, them or me? I ran it very successfully. If I wanted to make a business trip alibi that would resemble a David Hendricks sales trip, who in the world could have done a better job than me? If I wanted to do it and they say it doesn't look right, doesn't that show I wasn't trying to provide an alibi? Who knows my sales trip better than me? They say I couldn't even fake my own methods. Then they make a big deal, and they did, and they made a big hit with the jury out of a wrong license number that I wrote on a motel registration slip at Red Roof Inn in Madison, Wisconsin. They say it shows me to be a liar. Well, it doesn't show me to be a very good liar, because on that same slip I put my name, my address, my business name, my make and model of car, and gave them my master charge card, all correct. So if I was trying to elude somebody, I wasn't doing a very good job of it. The obvious answer is I simply misremembered my license number. Finally, the detective drove the route up to Wisconsin a year later, at the time of the trial, and he came up with a time that's over an hour short of the time that they figured it must have taken me to drive. This, I submit, is meaningless. He didn't ask me what route I took. He didn't ask me how fast I drove. He didn't even try to duplicate the trip, as he did know it. And Route 51 during that year has been under constant refurbishing, and a good section of it was 2-lane where it before was 1 lane. There are a lot of variables. That's not a fair thing to do, in my opinion. Also, I don't believe his time. He made it very, very fast. Too many variables. Okay, now, the state's theory that they presented to the jury that the children were dead by 9 o'clock p.m., and this is the one that is the most important in my mind, besides the stomach contents evidence, but this is part of it. Through their evidence, the state advanced the theory in closing that I killed the children and left the house all cleaned up to get rid of the bloody clothes and rags at 9 o'clock p.m., and then killed Susie after she got home at around 10:40 p.m. All right. What I was seen down the street with the children at 8:15 p.m. That's established. So what I had to do is get home, get the 3 kids into their pajamas, tuck them into bed, give them all time to fall asleep soundly, and then murder them all one after the other, clean up the weapons, clean up myself. I would have had, according to the police, blood splattered all over me, wrap up the bloody clothes, and go outside in 45 minutes. That's unreasonable. I appeal to any parent. Is that likely? 45 minutes? And then Susie, who according to everybody was an excellent mother, and she certainly was, loving mother, she came home and she climbed into bed without even going a few steps down the hall to look in on her children, to kiss them, to tuck them into their covers. That's unbelievable too. But those two things they just make that theory look not very likely. But just the other night in preparing for this interview, I was brainstorming this with my cellie. The crime, we were trying to reenact it. We got out some of the evidence. trying to figure out if there's anything we could find, and I found something that is, I think, very, very important. Patricia Orr from the crime lab in Morton, I think, it's on page 1264 of the discovery, found hair from Benji and Becky on both the axe and the knife, which were on them when they found the crime scene. Also, there was blood type ABO, which is the type that belongs to all 4 of the victims. There was no blood spattered about in Susie's room, and there were no hairs stuck to the bedspread she was supposedly killed through. Therefore, and this hair of the children's was found on the axe and knife in the children's room. The conclusion is inescapable that they were killed after Susie was. I've always thought this from the crime scene, and I've always known this 9 o'clock theory is absurd. And of course, I know that I'm not guilty, so I know something other investigators don't know about it. I've always thought that children were killed after Susie, but this is proof of it. It's not possible, in my mind, for the children to have been killed before Susie, or there would have been hair and blood in the master bedroom where Susie was, and there would have been Susie's hair in the children's room, and if I cleaned the axe off after killing the children, there wouldn't have been hair from the children on it. Now, Susie came home at 10:40 p.m., so allowing her time to get undressed and get into bed, you can figure she was not killed before 11 p.m., if I'm guilty, okay? The children killed next had to be after 11. So Dr. Baden's theory that the children were killed by 9 o'clock p.m., he's 99% sure, is off by more than a factor of 2. He says they were killed in 2 hours. They were actually alive for 4 hours. We know that. Now, take Scott's drive time, 5 hours, 45 minutes, which I believe is short. Add 45 minutes for my stops, which is part of the record. Knowing that I got to Stevens Point at, I think, at 7 o'clock, I had to leave at 12:30 a.m. That's normal mathematics, okay? If I killed the 4 of them, Susie first, cleaned up and wrapped the things up, and left, and then I had to find somewhere to dispose of the things before I went on my way. I had to kill Susie at least by midnight. So now we know Susie was killed between 11 o'clock and midnight, if I'm guilty. Okay, now she ate a plate full of raw vegetables, the thing that experts said are the hardest to digest. According to this theory, she has to have been killed between 1.5 and 2.5 hours after eating that plate full of vegetables. Now, the vegetables were entirely gone from her stomach, not observable at all. Just some starch particles. And starch, by the way, digests much faster than vegetables, so she must have eaten a cookie or something after she ate the vegetables. Now, Dr. Baden said that Susie could have died an hour to an hour and a half after she ate those vegetables. But again, he's the guy that testified that he's 99% sure the children died 2 hours before we know they did. And besides, we know she didn't die an hour to an hour and a half after, because an hour and a half after is 11 o'clock. The general drift of the expert's testimony suggests that Susie probably died well after midnight, or 2.5 or more hours after eating those vegetables. And if that's the case, not only am I not proven guilty, but I'm proven not guilty. Certainly, at least it casts such a huge doubt that I should not be here in this prison giving this interview to you. Okay, the state and the appellate court agree that I planned this out the week before, premeditated. If guilty, I would have had to plan it out the week before. I agree. Now, at my trial, there was testimony that on Sunday, the day before the night that they were killed, I invited a little girl, Kara Macy, Becky's best friend, to stay at our house, and I would watch her while Susie and her mother went to this shower for the women. Her mother accepted, and then later that night phoned and said she had made other arrangements and she was going to take Kara to the town where the shower was with her. Now, my question is, if I pre-planned this, I had this planned before Sunday, that's in the record. If I did this, I planned my business trip the week before, what in the world was I doing on Sunday throwing a wrench in my own plan, in the works of my own plan? I invited a girl to be at my house during the time I was planning to kill my children, according to the state. What was I going to do with her? Kill her? Her mother had to pick her up before I left for my trip. Couldn't do that. Leave her in the house and say, wait downstairs while I do something upstairs? That's ridiculous. The only thing you can conclude from the fact that I made that offer to Kara's mother, which was accepted, it was obviously a valid offer, was that I had no intention of killing my children that night. Finally, there's no physical evidence linking me to this crime. Not a fingerprint, not a blood spot, no clothes, blood in my clothes, no clothes in my hair. They picked through my scalp. They took my watch and went through all the intricacies of the Twist-A-Flex band. No blood spots anywhere. No physical evidence for me. Not a hair fiber, nothing. And I'm just beginning to go bald. So I was losing my hair at that time. If I had done something violent, unless I was all covered up, and you make a theory like that, I would have lost some hair. There's nothing. Also, there was clear evidence that someone else was in the house that night. Now, in a country, and I'll get into that in a second, I'm not going to leave that unsupported. In a country as great as ours, with a justice system as refined and tried as ours is, there's no excuse for convicting a man without evidence. Let me give you a few things from the record that support my innocence. 3 things showed that other people were probably in my house, what I just talked about. 1, there are 2 footprints near the unlatched door on the linoleum floor in that room of the house downstairs. They don't belong to me, my family, any police officer that was in there, anybody that's known. They're unidentified. They belong to someone the police hasn't found, and I suggest if you make a match of those prints, you'll find the murderers in this case. Susie cleaned the floor just that day, Monday. She always did on Monday, and she did that day, and she was a good housekeeper. The house was kept immaculately. Those footprints were clearly placed there after she cleaned that floor, which would be after Monday afternoon. Second, a burned wooden matchstick is found on the carpeted stairs going up to the 2nd floor. Now, there's no fireplace upstairs. The appellate court says, well, there was evidence that there's a fireplace in the house. Yeah, but it's downstairs. There's no smoking utensils in the house. There's nothing upstairs that needs fire. And furthermore, there's not another wooden matchstick in that whole house. Somebody brought that in from the outside. That's clear. And to pass that off like, well, there was a fireplace in the house is unfair and wrong. And finally, 2 and possibly 3 weapons were used. 2 were found there. We know that. Why would one person use more than one weapon? Remember, this axe is not a hatchet. It's not a little small thing. It's a full-size axe that you use for chopping down trees. I used it for splitting wood and taking camping with us. It takes 2 hands and a man to handle it. You can't handle it in one hand and a knife in the other hand. That's not a reasonable theory. I believe there were 2 people in the house. And even if you could, why? Why would somebody do that? Okay, another thing. This doesn't prove much, but it's very interesting. I don't know how many people have written me letters since I've been convicted and saying this is appalling. My little boy Joey ate beef stew at supper and then threw up the next morning when he got flipped over his bike, off the bike, and hit his stomach, and whole chunks of vegetables were in there 16 hours later. And similar stories like that. A lot of them. Any one of you who are parents know of such stories. You've seen that kind of thing happen. Children retain things in their stomach for hours and hours on end. For me to be convicted based on stomach contents evidence that the children would have evacuated their stomachs in 2 hours is very wrong. Very wrong. Unfair. Another thing, blood in the plumbing. Within days of the murders, the police asked the judge for a search warrant to tear the plumbing apart in the house. In their request, which is technically called a complaint for search warrant, they say, quote, from the observation and tests, including the amount of blood in the bedroom of the child victims and the number and apparent force of the blows which caused the deaths, applicant believes that the murderer would have had to have blood splattered on his body or clothing during the commission of the murders. And then they say that the murderer might have washed himself off and left, quote, blood, clothing, or other evidence within the plumbing system of the house. They got their search warrant. They tore my house's plumbing apart. They examined it. And to the grand jury, a crime specialist for the state testified that they can determine 1/1000th of a particle of blood. They failed to find anything. Not a particle of blood. The state proved for me that I didn't wash myself off in that house, and yet when they get to trial, they propound that theory to the jury. They're the ones that had proved that it wasn't true. Now, it's very clear that we had a very happy and peaceable family life. The state admits I love my children. They can hardly deny it. They say they don't think I love Susie. They say it, but there's no evidence for that at all. It's just something they're saying. They wish it were true. I'll give you evidence that I love Susie. I loved her very dearly. She loved me. We were a happy, we were a loving, we were a close-knit family. This comes from her diary. And the other night when I was preparing for this interview, I got out her diary and I looked through the last 6 months of her life to pick out things that had me in them, had us doing something together, me doing something for her, her doing something for me, those kinds of things, or us doing something as a family. There are so many entries, and her diary is just one of those small books where you have 5 years in it, not much room. There are so many entries that I wrote them all down, but I couldn't possibly read them all to you. I'll read a few of them. This starts 6 months before the murder. June 7, took kids to Moraine View State Park, picnic, hiked, and played. David watched Kramer's kids while Karen and I went out and shopped. June 10, packed up and camped overnight at Moraine View State Park. June 12, had picnic supper at Funk's Grove. June 18th, another lady, Beth, Amy, Becky, Grace, Benji, and I drove to a cabin in Michigan. This was a vacation that Susie took while I was away doing business in Wisconsin. She took all by herself with a girlfriend, and they took the kids and some nieces and nephews up and spent a week in a cabin. This is the kind of life she led. We camped at Sangamon Park. This is July 1. July 4, we saw fireworks together at Miller Park. I thought of this the other night. I watched the Liberty celebration on ABC, and the fireworks were spectacular. And I thought if I could sit with my little children in Miller Park and just be with them for 5 minutes. But I can't. It's not available. But those were happy times. Excuse me. July 5, girls gone to Delavan. We went to Peoples for supper. July 8, left AM on trip. This is our family vacation now. It starts July 8, Omaha. July 9, Grand Island, go to the zoo. July 10, Pioneer Village. July 11, Cheyenne. 12, climb the Veda Booze. July 16 at Byland's Cabin in Colorado Springs. July 19, Chuck Wagon Supper. July 20, Rodeo Breakfast. Went to mountain climbing. U.S. Air Force Academy, Denver. July 21, Dave makes business calls. July 22, Jan and I go shopping while Dave babysits. July 23, Salina, Kansas. 24, we get home. Give you an idea of the vacation, the entries on the vacation. July 26, Dave comes back from business trip, and we went to Chuck E. Cheese for supper. July 28th, our 10th anniversary. Angie babysat, and we went out for the afternoon and evening. Dave bought me a camera. August 10, we all went to Kankakee with David. Another business trip that I took them with, had picnic on the way back. August 5, David's birthday, went to Miller Park Zoo, picnic there. August 11, Glenna came over and gave me a perm. David babysat while we ate out at Red Lobster. August 13, flew up to northern Illinois to Uncle's cabin, swam all afternoon and skied, had supper, then flew home late. Had lunch at Funk's Grove, August 14. August 15, got a few clothes for David. There's one of those entries. August 18, picked up Kara and went to Lake of the Woods. August 20, Jerry and Liz babysat while we ate out. August 22, I don't know why I mentioned that one. August 26, flew to England. Now here's a trip. This is within 3 months of their murders. Susie and I, the children were babysat by my mother and my sister, taking turns, and Susie and I flew to England for a trip together. It was a business trip partly, but let me read you the entries quickly on that. You'll see it was obviously a vacation trip for Susie and me. Flew to England 26. August 27, arrived at Gatwick Airport, train to Bournemouth. August 30, Compton Gardens, drove to Bristol, got bed and breakfast. August 31, Gloucester, went through Gloucester Cathedral, drove through Powder, Wales to Brecon. September 1, left Brecon, drove through Wales and the Snowdonians, very beautiful. Stopped at Chester, bed and breakfast, called kids. September 2, toured Town Wall, church, shopped. September 3, drove toward London, stayed in Bedford. September 4, drove to London, got hotel. September 5, David at business convention. There's a whole week's gone by, his first business. I shopped at Harrods and along Brompton Road and went to Victoria and Albert Museum. September 6, I shopped in day, and p.m. we walked to Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens. We dined at Frederick's, fantastic meal. We called home. September 7, took a day tour of London, saw changing of guards, St. Paul's Cathedral, Tower of London. September 8, David all day at convention. I spent all day shopping. We were both tired, so just relaxed in room and p.m. September 9, went to Kensington Palace and Covent Garden. September 10, went to Madame Tussauds Museum and Science Museum. Took train to Wokingham. September 11, at Perry's, friends of ours. September 12, Marion took us to Heathrow Airport. We flew home. So good to see kids. September 15, David ordered flowers for me. We went to eat at Grand Cafe. That's her birthday. September 16, labeled slides from England. 17, went to Pumpkin Festival in Morton. 19, we ordered a new station wagon. 24, Becky's birthday, to McDonald's for breakfast, to Chuck E. Cheese for supper. September 26, David surprised me. He asked Liz to babysit and took me out to eat at Jumer's. October 7, David and I ate late candlelight supper together at home. October 10, no school. We drove with David to Kankakee. October 20, worked more in dining room. And this was a project that was done just days before the murders. Susie and I together repapered and put cove around the dining room. Ate dinner at Tin Sin, October 30. November 1, Martha babysat. We went to Bennigan's and browsed through mall. November 3, teachers conference, all doing fine in school. We left at supper time, stayed in hotel in Galesburg. November 4, drove to Quad Cities. Dave did business, stayed at Jumer's, kids swam. November 5, the last entry in her diary, left Jumer's, stopped at Bishop Hill on the way home. Now, you can search through her diary for 5 years, for 10 years that we were married. You won't find one entry of any kinds of problems with me, of any kind of dissatisfaction with me. I'm not saying I was a perfect husband, but I was a good husband, and I love Susie. And you won't find one entry like that. You will find problems. She put them down. When Benji was a baby, he was very troublesome. When he was a tiny infant, he had a digestive problem, and he hurt all the time. He cried when he ate, and he cried when he was hungry, and he was always hurting. For 10 months this went on, and it was rough on her, and she wrote it in her diary. You'll find it there. You won't find any problems with me in her entire diary. And I want to say one thing more about Susie before I go off, to clear the air, and as a tribute to Susie, who deserves so much more than the memories she has in the minds of most. Susie was my friend, my lover, my wife, my companion. She excelled as a mother, as a housekeeper, as a business partner, in every way. Those who speak highly of her aren't just eulogizing her because she's gone. It's true. She was that good a person. She was quiet, she was loving, she was pious, she was intelligent, she was the valedictorian in her class, she was diligent, and at the same time she was fun-loving. And to counter the malicious lies that have been spread about Susie by the prosecution, she was in every respect a woman. I'm not going to go into the private details of our lives, but I can say that I often told her that she reminded me of the woman in the country song, Behind Closed Doors. There was nothing about Susie that I found unsatisfying. And there's no support for any such allegations. You'll never talk to anyone who can say that I ever said anything negative to them about her, nor she about me. I have been hurt horribly through all this, but what cuts deepest into my heart is to hear such unfounded lies about Susie. Say what you will about me, I can't stop it anyway, but leave Susie alone. You at least know that she was an innocent victim in this. Okay. Why then, with so little evidence against me, with such a good family history, and with some evidence that shows me to be not guilty, why do so many people believe that I'm guilty? Several reasons. 1, First, what put the police on my trail is the fact that I'm the only survivor. The question they want me to answer then is, Dave, if not you, who? My answer is, if not me, how could I know? I have never seen the house since this happened. I was so emotionally destabilized by losing my family that for a long time I couldn't even bear to think about it, much less solve the murders. This brainstorming I did the other night would not have even been a possibility a year and a half ago. And I was put in jail and kept from trying to figure things out long before I was in any shape to figure things out. 2, the interview that I gave the day after my family was slain is what has caused everyone to think that I must be guilty. 2 reasons. 1 is I was lacking in emotion, and 2 is I came across as a religious fanatic. Neither is true about me, but I've seen that tape, and I can't blame people for getting that impression. Emotion. If my emotion wasn't what people wanted or expected, it's simply because I was in shock. I was paralyzed with grief. I have absolutely no recollection of giving that interview, but I've since seen it on TV. As to my religious statements, I still believe my family is happy with Jesus, and I take some comfort in that fact. But I would in a second bring them back here to be with me if I could. That interview in no way reflected my true feelings. I was simply repeating the comforting words that had been whispered sympathetically in my ear all day long by well-meaning Christian friends. I was in shock. 3, the focus of the police fixated on me long before they had any evidence against me, simply because I was the sole surviving family member. They knew I was guilty even before I arrived on the scene. Look at the 2,000 pages of information the police collected about me. With very few exceptions, they relate to me and only to me. That's all they focused on. They have my personal papers. They have letters from a fellowship foundation that I formed. They have my checkbook. They have my phone receipts, master charge, things that could not possibly have anything to do with anyone else and didn't have anything to do with me, as it turned out. They got them all. They focused their entire investigation on me. And now they ask, why, if he's not guilty, did all our evidence point to him? That's not even an honest question. Their evidence pointed to me because they pointed it to me. Read the discovery to find out the truth of my statement. It's very clear. Obviously, another factor is that I was arrested. That makes people think I'm guilty. People shouldn't do it, but they do form an opinion of guilt at that time. I understand that. We all do it. After all that I've seen, I see someone on TV arrested for something horrible. That Salmonok killing of that little girl bothered me so badly when I had to shut the TV off. She looked just like Becky with her braids. And when I saw that, I thought, I'm a peaceable man and I've never hurt a soul, but I don't have any idea what I'd do if I were in the room with a man like that. I can't imagine. Probably nothing, but it sure brought hatred, it brought vehemence, it brought vengeful thoughts out in me, and I didn't even know the man. And I thought to myself, David, you know better than that. You've been through that. You shouldn't do that. He's just been accused. But we all do it. I understand that. And then, of course, the fact that I was convicted by a jury, and then the appellate court turned me down, it makes people sure that I'm guilty. What can I say? There's nothing really that will change people's minds. I know that. I feel obligated to point out to them that I'm not guilty, to review, as I've done just now, some of the problems with the state's case, and let the trusting public at least know that when the police arrest somebody, they haven't necessarily solved the crime. Lastly, many of the rumors that have circulated about me and my family have contributed to public opinion against me. Some of them are crazy, some of them are stupid, some of them are impossible. But many people faithfully invent, pass along, and verify them with religious fervor. A great forum of them, of course, was Problems and Solutions on WJBC, and just talk all around town. They include rumors that I belong to a cult that routinely practiced human sacrifice, that I use my airplane for drug smuggling, that I have illegitimate children all over the U.S., all over the world, I've heard. Some of them don't even speak English. Everything. The police did their share of rumor passing. They told my neighbor, a few days after the crime, the police had switched from my house to a vehicle out there, and the neighbor said, why? The police said, because we have reason to believe that Hendricks is planning to get in his airplane and make a kamikaze run into his house. This kind of rumor spreading is not right by the police. They're supposed to be more professional than that. And this one I'm going to mention is downright malicious, and the police spread this. That's horrible. They said that Susie had to leave home early because she was impregnated by her own father years before. If you knew her father, and if you knew her, and if you knew that family, you would know that that's impossible, unbelievable, crazy. The police certainly knew that, and yet they told this to people. They said, we've heard this, and we want to verify this. They passed this along. It was simply trash and no less. And I fault the police for doing things like that. That's low and that's not right. Okay, this category at the end, I think this is the last. Could I have done it? I've gone through, I've said I'm not guilty. I've said the evidence didn't prove me guilty. I've said some things proved I'm innocent, and I've gone through reasons why people believe that I'm guilty. And now, could I have done it? It's widely accepted that anyone can commit murder. I agree. I could not disagree after I've seen what I've seen here in prison. Some of the mildest, quietest, best-mannered, most cultured men in here are in here for murder. But what they did was they probably murdered their wife or her paramour or both of them or something like that. It was a crime of passion. It was done without thought. Immediately afterward, they were sorry. They still have remorse. That's the kind of crime it was. My case is quite different. If you accept my guilt, you must say that I planned it out in advance. You must say that I love my wife and children, if you're honest. You must say that I took an axe and a knife, and one after the other murdered not only my wife, but each of my little children as well. So that after I had carried through this well-thought-out plan on the first one, I still had no change of heart. I did the same to the second, and then the third, and then the fourth. This to my own little children who I played with and teased and read to and taught right from wrong, good from evil, virtue from vice. This, I submit, is unbelievable. No man in his right senses could do this. I have never heard of a man undisturbed mentally whose life is tranquil and happy, making and executing such a decision. I could not even make, much less execute, such a plan. That's why those who knew me support me. It's not that I've put on an act and fooled somebody. My family has known me for 30 years. Susie's family has known me for over 15 years. Other friends have known me from anywhere from the 30 years to 3 years. These people have looked at the facts, have seen my life, have witnessed my family's interaction, the love, the caring, the sharing, the mutual concern, and they have formed an opinion that I am not guilty, and they are correct. Now I've suffered plenty through all this, but so have they. No doubt my pain has been the greatest, but each time some new injustice occurs to me, the suffering spreads, not only to me, but to my parents whose name is sullied, to my brothers and sisters and their children, to my in-laws, Susie's parents, and siblings and nieces and nephews, the cousins of my children, to friends and supporters. The pain this has caused is enormous.